Hello and welcome back to the Live From Rest podcast. And in this episode, I'm talking again to my friend and colleague, Tom Phelan. In this episode, we're delving into the famous serenity prayer. Simple words, but so very profound and actually life-changing. I'm Steve Smith, your host and the author of the Live From Rest app. In the Live From Rest podcast, we take time to explore the ancient art of being. We host conversations, short talks, and reflections about how we can live from rest in a world full of busyness and distraction. We created the Live From Rest app because we needed it, and we think you might need it too. If you haven't done so already, make sure that you go to the App Store or to Google Play Store and download it today. Well, Tom, it is great to have you back on the podcast. Welcome again. Lovely to see you.
Thanks.
It was fairly recently that we had you, and we called that The Gift of Desperation, which I think was a great title in relation to recovery, but actually life.
Yes.
So thank you for all that you shared on that occasion. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. Yeah. I'm looking forward to what we have in store today, or where our conversation goes today.
Well, the thing that we talked about that would be great to discuss is the serenity prayer. And as I've shared on this podcast before, I love the 12 steps. I work with people in addiction, and I think the 12 steps is an amazing program to help people out of addiction. But actually, it's got so many benefits for life in general. But something that I really have come to value is the serenity prayer. I am aware that in a 12 Steps Fellowship, we generally finish with the serenity prayer. And it's something that probably a lot of people know, and it's quite easy to pray prayers, isn't it? And just recite them without even thinking about what you're praying. But I'll start by just saying the serenity prayer. It's God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And isn't it easy just to say that without really thinking about what you're saying? But recently, for me in particular, the first part of that has been so helpful, just to recognize the power of accepting things I cannot change and the peace that brings. And so I think it was with that in mind that we talked about the serenity prayer. And I know it's something that really interests you as well. So Tom, why don't you just, let's talk about maybe go however you want to go. But I'd love to hear your take on the components of the prayer and maybe the prayer in general. And of course, the other thing to say is what we call the serenity prayer is actually a part of a larger prayer, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
But Tom, give us your take on the serenity prayer.
Well, like you were saying, Steve, it's something that's it's said in many 12-step recovery groups, and I think there's a way that we can get into saying it by rote and maybe forgetting what it means. I certainly have done that. I don't need to ascribe that to anyone else, but I've certainly done that myself. And when we really unpack it and its meaning and its value and what we're actually turning to God for, it's incredibly valuable. It's life-changing. And I think God does meet those requests. I think acceptance of what is a huge factor in us being able to have the peace to sort of continue and to move forward as human beings. And actually, it really is accepting the truth of a situation. And I don't know if you want me to sort of relate it to recovery at this stage of the conversation, but I think one of the first points of acceptance that I ever found, I had no real idea what acceptance meant or the acceptance of the truth meant until actually I accepted the gravity of my own addiction, and that was something that I realized I couldn't change. And until that point, I had been fighting it. I'd been denying its gravity. I'd been denying what I'd been told I needed to do about it. I was denying its finality, that was where I was at, that there was no way of me controlling it or minimizing it, that there had to be a sort of a radical solution to that. And that took a long time to accept. And that was perhaps for me the first time that I'd had to accept a truth that was really difficult, because actually my life depended on accepting a truth that was really difficult for me to accept, that there was no way forward on my own steam and no compromise. There had to be a real turning point in that, and that was as a result of having that moment of acceptance. And I always need to remember that it's about asking for the serenity, that moment to pause, to accept the truth. I'm asking God for the serenity to accept, so the ability to even slow down and pause and see the truth for what it is, and then be willing to dwell in it.
And you're asking for the serenity to accept, and then the acceptance brings serenity, or brings peace, doesn't it? I mean, I'll just say, in my life, I mean, I have struggled, for me, with sleep, with insomnia, with some anxiety in relation to that, and there's something that I've discovered is something that's called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is really based on accepting the things you cannot change, and it's a game changer. It was an absolute game changer for me. So tell me what about the peace, the serenity that comes from accepting the things you cannot change.
Well, I think until you accept the truth of a situation, you almost have a duty bound to keep fighting against it. You have to keep seeing what you can do to change that reality. And when you finally realize, no, I'm going to have to I'm going to have to work within that reality, that brings a certain peace. It brings, actually, I'm going to follow a certain way. There are other people living inside this reality, because it is reality. And I'm not having to sort of keep hold of my own reality, and I'm going to have to work with what is. And I think that's incredibly liberating and a great relief. Even though it can come with a bit of grief of accepting something that is difficult.
Because it could be seen as a defeat, couldn't it? You see, you one way of looking at it, and maybe when you're actually fighting the thing that you can't change, you would think that to actually stop fighting would be surrender. And of course, surrender, I've heard you talk about surrender in relation to the steps. And surrender could feel like a disaster, but it's actually ultimately a victory, isn't it?
So long as you're surrendering to the right things and the right facts, the facts. So so this is where the rest of the serenity prayer necessarily comes in, because if we just say it's all about acceptance, we just have to lie down and accept everything. I think that leaves out. I do hear people saying that, and I don't want to detract from what the message is in that. But for me, it's not all about acceptance. Acceptance of the truth is the beginning, but there are other components to certainly this prayer that mean that we're protected from that kind of disempowering, I'm just going to accept everything, lying down. Sure.
So it is a package. Yeah.
Very much so. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just expand on that, the acceptance alongside the courage to change the things you can. And obviously you're coming at it from someone who has dealt with addiction and recovery, but I don't think I'm convinced that these principles apply to every one of us. But carry on.
Absolutely. I think they do apply to every one of us, as far as I can see. I think the use in having it through the lens of addiction, as I do, is just it kind of simplifies a concept for me. It simplifies the concept of being a human being in much smaller terms, a kind of more easy to analyze frame. So if I relate the courage to change the things I can back to addiction and recovery, and then more broadly, to accept that I was addicted to an extent that would be fatal if I'd have just if I'd have carried on using my own solutions or just trying to mitigate and minimize. I then had to have the courage to do something to step forward, to actually the courage to, because there is pain in stepping forward. There is pain in stepping forward on the basis of the truth. So when we learn the truth, we have to have the courage to then do what we actually can do. There are things that we can't do. There are things that we can't fix. But to operate in that truth and to actually take some power back, some agency back, which we're meant to have, human beings. God gives us a lot of agency. He doesn't make us powerless over everything, just, I accept everything that's around you. He gives us remarkable agency and free will and power to do the things that he wants us to do. So actually, I think it's asking to align with that. As a Christian and someone with recovery, it's okay, but God does have a will for me, not just to accept everything as it is, or to say, I'm addicted, therefore this is my lot. I cannot change that. I'm just going to see if something happens. Either, I'm going to be zapped by a overnight miracle, or my community's going to fix me, or some magic thing's going to fix me. But other than that, I'm just going to have to accept my lot. No, we have to have the courage to change the things we can. That's our responsibility. And the wisdom to know the difference for me is the key thing, because having the acceptance to being able to accept what we can't change and having the courage to tackle what we can change can give us a lot of dilemmas. We're human beings. That level of wisdom is pretty hard to get sometimes. We don't know what we're meant to be doing a lot of the time. Therefore, that asking God for discernment, reading the word, praying, asking other people that believe the same things about God as we do, and thinking, okay, what does it look like to accept the things I can't change? What do I need the courage to do? What could it be a big mistake to think that I can do? Because we can sometimes really overshoot and think, I'm doing the right thing here. This is what I've got to do. I'm going to take the power back. I'm going to wrest control over this situation. And we haven't really thought about it, or we haven't prayed about it. It might be our own wills, and it might really backfire if that's the case. And again, as I was saying at the beginning, if we're accepting something that we really do have agency in, that could be fatal if we're not doing something about a pressing problem, or at least it would be totally irresponsible for us to be accepting something that we actually have agency in and could make a difference for the better in. So that discernment, asking God's help in discerning that is crucial.
So what sort of things, I know what you mean, but give us some examples of the sort of thing that you need the courage to do. For somebody who is struggling with an addiction, but maybe somebody just with anxiety, or maybe you can think of other situations, maybe sort of ground it in some examples.
Well, I would say at very base level in early recovery, for someone in early recovery, just not picking up that first drink or drug is a great act of faith. It takes courage. The acute withdrawal symptoms aside, the ones further down the line where someone just has that craving or desperation or moment where life gets too much and they think, I know what would work for me right now. I know what would ease this fear, this pain, this anxiety, and it's the drug that I always used or the drink that I always used. Having that to get past that is a step of great faith and courage. So, and actually, it's a step of great change. So, I would say that's one of the first things, and then that's one of the first examples. And then further down the line, as we're wanting to build our recovery and walk with God, those moments of doing the next right thing, that things that go against the grain, like making amends to people that we don't want to make amends with, or reconciliation, or addressing some outstanding issues or debts or things that we've wanted to sweep aside, but we know that actually to move forward and to regrow with integrity, we need to actually address those things. We need to have the courage to change the things we can, not just the serenity to accept I'm always going to be like this. It's just because that would be a big mistake. So we need that discernment, and we need that discernment from God to know what goes in what category.
Yeah. And in the whole area of making amends, which is such a crucial subject in itself, there's a need for wisdom, isn't there?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's not always the right thing to just sort of, bring someone up or get in contact and try and make amends, that you could do some serious damage by saying the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Yes, and that's very much covered in the 12 steps, with step 8 saying that you make a list of the people that you harm and become willing to make amends to them all. So you're absolutely ready in your heart to make amends to everyone, and that's an accountable process, and it's a prayerful process. It should be a prayerful process, and you discern the best way of addressing situations. And then step 9, which states we may direct amends to those people, except when to do so would injure them or others. So we're not going to walk into a situation and disrupt it because that would actually be egotistical, and it would be selfish. We'd be saying, I'm going to make this grandiose amends. So there's I think bringing that serenity prayer to every stage of recovery, but every stage of life would seem logical for someone of faith.
So something that we should all be putting in our personal prayer books, the serenity prayer, putting on our walls, in our bathrooms.
Yeah, and so certainly. And as I agree with you, I'm thinking, am I doing that enough? So that's a good thing about these conversations, is that we always realise that actually there's probably something that there might be a situation today where I've left that out. Something
that's worth pondering. But I mean, I certainly want to. The point I would want to end on is, certainly for me, the whole thing of accepting the things I cannot change brings so much peace. And we are so often just fighting battles that God's not calling us to fight, that we're never going to win. And it's not the end of the world if we just sometimes lay down our sword, is it?
Absolutely. And what you've said there is, that encapsulates it. For me, it's they're battles that God is not calling us to fight, and that we're not going to win. And it's deeply empowering to move on from them.
Well, Tom, it's so good to talk to you. Thank you so much. And we will be talking to you again soon. Really grateful for you joining us on this show, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you.
Thank you for joining us. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please do share and rate our podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and the Lord bless you. Bye for now.